It happened in less than 60 seconds. No warning, no conversation, just a loud voice, and then a slap that cut through the silence like glass shattering on tile. Everyone turned. Shoppers froze where they stood. A mother gasped and pulled her child close. A cashier stopped mid-scan, eyes wide. No one knew what to say or what to do. One woman stood trembling, not from fear, but from the raw sting across her cheek. The other stood rigid, fuming, her voice loud enough to echo off the walls. "This is not your kind of store," she snapped, fists clenched. No one moved to stop her. Not the staff, not security. Just a handful of stunned strangers watching something they couldn't quite process. And yet, the woman who was struck didn't scream, didn't yell. She looked around the store slowly, eyes scanning every inch, like she was seeing something deeper, like she knew something none of them did. A moment passed, and then came 4 calm words, the kind that stops a heart mid-beat, the kind that shifts the energy in a room so fast the air changes. They weren't loud, they weren't emotional, but they ended everything, and started something no one in that store was ready for. Before we move on, don't forget to subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ for more powerful true stories like this. Also, tell us in the comments, which country are you watching from right now? We see you, and we appreciate you. She never liked walking into a room and having people look at her like she didn't belong. That feeling, that weight, was something she'd carried since childhood. Long before the money, the meetings, the boardrooms, she was just another girl in hand-me-down shoes and a jacket that couldn't keep the cold out. The neighborhood she grew up in wasn't known for opportunity. It was known for empty promises, flickering street lamps, and parents working 2 jobs just to stay behind on rent. There were days her stomach ached from skipping meals, nights she stayed up because the walls were too thin to block out the arguing next door. Still, she showed up to school every day, clean, quiet, focused, while the world tried to convince her she was already counted out. What they didn't see was the fire building inside her. She read everything she could get her hands on. She watched people, how they moved, how they spoke, what they cared about, and she started to dream, not in vague ideas, but in blueprints. Every spare moment became a stepping stone. Every setback, more fuel. Her first business didn't come from a trust fund or a mentor's favor. It came from grit. From 3 a.m. strategy sessions on a second-hand laptop, from getting doors slammed in her face, from being the only Black woman in every meeting, and often the only one who had to prove she belonged there. Over time, she built something massive. A retail empire that started with 1 store in a rundown strip mall and grew into hundreds across the country. She did it without cutting corners, without selling her name to people who wanted to rebrand her into someone easier to swallow. And yes, she became a billionaire, but you'd never know it looking at her. She didn't care about flashing it. No assistants trailing behind, no heels too tall to walk in, no camera crews. When she visited her stores, and she did often, she dressed like the customers they claimed to care about. Jeans, plain t-shirt, comfortable sneakers, a simple purse over the shoulder. Some thought it was strange. Why wouldn't someone with her status demand recognition? But that wasn't the point. See, anyone can act right when the boss is watching. She wanted to see how employees treated the quiet Black woman browsing the aisles with no makeup and no fanfare. She wanted to feel what it was like to be unseen, ignored, or worse, watched like a threat. This visit was supposed to be one of those. Just another quiet check-in. No grand entrance. No cameras. She parked in the customer lot, not the reserved space. She walked in through the front doors, just like anyone else. She'd planned to spend no more than 30 minutes in the building. Take note of the cleanliness, gauge staff behavior, see how well the floor was stocked, then leave. She didn't arrive in a luxury car. No tinted windows, no designer handbag slung over her shoulder, just a soft hoodie, denim, and quiet steps across the gleaming tile floor of one of her most successful locations, a flagship store in one of the most affluent parts of the city. The kind of neighborhood where people smile wide at certain faces and clutch their bags tighter at others. As soon as she entered, the shift was instant. A bell chimed overhead, soft and welcoming. But the welcome stopped there. No greeting, no eye contact, no warmth. She walked past the fragrance section. Nothing. No, "Can I help you?" Not even a nod from the two employees chatting near the counter. Moments later, two white women entered behind her. One in a bright blouse, the other in tennis gear. Both were greeted with big smiles and offers of water or champagne within seconds. She lingered, pretending to examine a display of scarves, though her eyes were elsewhere, watching, listening, taking mental notes. Another associate passed her twice, never offering a word. Still, she said nothing. Her expression remained neutral. Then she noticed the woman near the back, blonde, tense posture, arms crossed, watching, not browsing, not assisting, just watching. It didn't take long before she made her way over. "Can I help you with something?" The words were sharp, with no real interest behind them. More like a test. She looked up. "No, just browsing." A pause. Then, "Are you sure you're in the right store?" It wasn't a question. Not really. It was a challenge wrapped in a smile that didn't reach the eyes. She offered no reaction, just a polite nod before turning back toward the shelves. But the manager didn't leave. Instead, she followed. One aisle, then another, then stopped short when she reached into her purse to check her phone. "Excuse me," the woman said. "We don't allow people to loiter. If you're not planning to buy anything, I'll have to ask you to leave." Several heads turned nearby. A couple glanced up from the jewelry display. She raised an eyebrow. "I haven't been here 5 minutes." The tone shifted again. "Well, I've seen your type in here before," the manager said, lowering her voice but not her hostility. "You walk around pretending to shop, waiting for the right moment." The right moment for what? To snatch something. "We're not stupid." The air thickened. Not just from the accusation, but from how confidently it was delivered, as if it were routine, as if it were deserved. She didn't respond, just stared. "You can either buy something or leave. Now." Still calm, still steady. She looked down at a nearby watch, admired it for a second, then looked back up. "Is this how you treat all your customers?" That question, quiet and direct, seemed to push the manager further. "We treat real customers with respect. People who come in here to spend money, not case the place like a..." She stopped herself before finishing that word, but the silence said enough. A man nearby began filming on his phone. Another shopper raised an eyebrow, inching closer. She didn't yell, didn't raise her voice. "I'd like the contact information for your corporate office." "No," the manager snapped. "You can get out, now." Then, the moment that made the room stop breathing, the manager's hand shot forward. A loud crack rang through the store. Her head turned with the slap, hair shifting across her cheek. For a second, no one moved. No one blinked. One customer dropped a purse. Another whispered, "Did she just..." The manager's face was flushed, her chest rising fast. "Get out, before I call the cops." Phones were out now. 3, maybe 4 people recording. The woman stood tall. Slowly, she brought a hand to her cheek, touched the skin, then lowered it again. She looked around, took in every face, every stunned employee, every silent shopper who didn't know what to say. And then she turned back to the manager. Her voice was almost soft. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." No screaming, no cursing, no scene. And with that, she turned and walked out. Not hurried, not shaken, head high, shoulders back, like someone who had absolutely nothing to prove. Back in the store, nobody moved. The silence was heavier now. And behind the counter, the staff didn't know what to do. The video hit the internet like a spark dropped on dry grass. It began with a single post, just a 23-second clip uploaded to a small account. No captions, no fancy hashtags. Just a quiet note. "This just happened at store name and city." Within an hour, the numbers started climbing. Hundreds of shares turned into thousands, then tens of thousands. The views spiraled past 1 million before the day was done. The footage was raw. No dramatic edits, no music. Just the truth. A black woman in casual clothes standing calmly inside a high-end store. A white manager towering over her, voice loud, face twisted in frustration. The confrontation built in real time. Then the slap, sharp, undeniable, with a sound that made the internet stop. But what truly caught fire wasn't just the violence, it was the final words. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." Within hours, digital sleuths went to work. It didn't take long. Someone found a still image from a Forbes profile 2 years ago. Another matched the face from the video to a keynote speaker at a major business summit. Then came the floodgate. She wasn't just some random shopper. She was the founder, the majority owner, the billionaire behind the very store she was kicked out of. Screenshots surfaced showing her in boardrooms at philanthropy events, next to mayors and governors. Articles emerged highlighting how she built her company from the ground up after growing up in housing projects, a symbol of resilience, of success, of what was possible. And yet, she'd been slapped in her own store. That realization hit people like gut punch. Comments filled every corner of the internet. She built that empire from nothing and still gets treated like this? She was slapped in her own store? Nah, fire everybody. I can't imagine the kind of restraint it takes to walk away like that. This is why Black women stay guarded. People always say money protects you. Clearly, it doesn't. How many more are treated like this without cameras around? Some tried to defend the manager, but their voices were drowned in the tidal wave of public fury. Major influencers weighed in. Celebrities reposted the video with captions like, "Unbelievable," and "She built the table," and they tried to throw her out of the room. A famous talk show host opened her next episode by showing the video live. Another called the slap a symptom of a deeper disease in this country. The store's social media accounts went dark. No posts, no comments, just silence. But it didn't stop users from flooding the last available post with fury. "Where's your statement? You better fire that manager and apologize publicly. Y'all slapped the woman who signs your checks." That's wild. People didn't want apologies. They wanted accountability. They demanded consequences, not just for the manager, but for every silent witness, every employee who stood by and watched it happen. Boycotts were called. Protesters appeared outside several store locations with signs reading, "Racism is bad for business," and "She owns the store, and you still profiled her." News outlets picked it up by the end of the day. Not just local news, national broadcasts, morning shows, business panels. The headlines were relentless. CEO slapped in her own store. Manager unaware she's the owner. Billionaire businesswoman racially profiled and assaulted by her own staff. When racism meets power, the CEO who got the last word. By nightfall, the video had crossed 45 million views. That number would double by the end of the week. And through it all, she said nothing. No interviews, no statements, just silence, which only made the public lean in closer. What would she say? What would she do? And most importantly, what would happen to that manager? The world waited, and the pressure kept rising. By the next morning, the silence broke. A short, tightly worded statement appeared across all official channels. It didn't begin with excuses. It didn't mention ongoing investigations or vague internal procedures. It simply confirmed what millions had demanded. The store manager had been terminated, effective immediately. No suspension, no paid leave, no waiting period, just gone. But that was only the beginning. Within 48 hours, more dominoes fell. An internal audit, rushed into motion as the video racked up global headlines, revealed that this wasn't an isolated incident. Multiple complaints had been logged over the past year regarding that same store. Patterns emerged, similar descriptions, shoppers being followed, questioned, ignored. Always with a common thread: race. What made it worse? Most of those complaints had been brushed aside. Minimal follow-up, no real accountability. That changed overnight. District leadership? Gone. Regional leadership? Replaced. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't about scapegoats, it was about structural rot. And if the leadership pipeline allowed that kind of culture to take root, it would be uprooted, top to bottom. Then came the next announcement. Quiet, but serious. The store, the one at the center of it all, was closing temporarily. Not for renovations, not for inventory, for training. Every staff member is required to attend a new, mandatory program. Not a check-the-box seminar, not a pre-recorded module, but a comprehensive, instructor-led racial bias and cultural sensitivity curriculum designed to confront both unconscious and overt prejudice. But that wasn't all. The announcement included this detail. That training wasn't limited to just one location. It was being rolled out chain-wide, every store, every employee, every level. From cashiers to executives, no one exempt. It was a bold move, not without risk. Most corporations issued statements and quietly moved on. This was different. The public noticed. Social media, which had flamed with outrage just days before, now shifted tone. Comments changed. Now this is how you respond. Accountability from the top. Respect. She didn't have to say a word, and still, change happened. I'm shopping here because of this response. Influencers who once demanded boycotts began reversing course, encouraging their audiences to support businesses that take real action. Civil rights leaders issued statements of cautious praise, calling the move a rare example of corporate courage under pressure. The company's brand reputation, initially dented by the viral footage, rebounded with force. Media coverage pivoted. New headlines emerged. Retail giant faces racism, responds with overhaul. Billionaire owner's silence speaks louder than words. Corporate culture shift from slap to systemic reform. The store's leadership team held a live press briefing a week later. No fluff, no denial, just a firm commitment, acknowledgement of failure, a roadmap for reform, a timeline for execution. The billionaire never appeared on stage. Her name wasn't mentioned, but knew this wave of change didn't begin in a boardroom. It started on the floor of a store, with a slap, with silence, and a single sentence that carried the weight of history. The public didn't forget the violence, but they saw the response, and in a world weary of empty apologies, this one didn't just sound different, it felt different, and it proved one thing beyond doubt. Power doesn't always speak loudly, but when it moves, everything shifts. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and sadly, it wouldn't be the last. The sting of that slap didn't begin in that store. It echoed something older, something embedded deep in memory, etched from years of walking into rooms and knowing instantly she was being judged, not by what she said, but by what she looked like. The silence after the strike wasn't new either. It was the same silence that always followed the raised eyebrow at the airport check-in, the suspicious look at the luxury car dealership, the casual glance of doubt in upscale restaurants where waitstaff seemed surprised she wanted a table and not a job application. She'd learned over time that racism doesn't pause when your net worth hits a certain figure, that the world doesn't stop profiling you just because your tax bracket changed. What happened in that store was racism, raw and unfiltered. But what made it dangerous was how ordinary it felt for her and for so many others. It's easy for some to look at her wealth, her power, her status, and assume she's immune. But privilege doesn't erase race. Money doesn't shield you from perception. A billionaire walking into a store can still be treated like a thief if the people watching only see skin. She remembered once walking through a private airport terminal, a place where most travelers are chauffeured in, where the champagne flows before the luggage even lands. And still, a security officer had insisted on checking her ID 3 times, even as others walked past unchecked. The only difference between her and them, her skin. She remembered the time she was test driving a luxury vehicle. The salesman, polite but skeptical, kept asking if she was really interested in buying or just looking around. After signing the paperwork in full, no financing, no hesitation, he finally asked what she did for a living. Her answer left him speechless. But she never told those stories for pity. She told them because they weren't special. They were normal. And that was the problem. Because if she, someone who owns entire skyscrapers, who controls the fate of thousands of employees, could still be treated like she didn't belong, what chance did others have? She thought about the shoppers who'd been through that same store, who weren't billionaires, who didn't have cameras filming, who were followed, questioned, embarrassed, and had to swallow the insult because there was no one to listen, no one to believe them. She thought of the young black teenager who might walk into a high-end store for the first time, saving up months to buy something special, only to be stared down like a suspect. She thought of the single mother trying to grab dinner after a long day, only to be ignored at the counter while others were helped first. She thought of the quiet humiliation that black and brown people are expected to endure in places where they're made to feel like outsiders. It wasn't just racism, it was classism too. A system where appearance equals credibility, where wealth equals worth, but only for some, where looking like you don't belong becomes a justification for mistreatment, and dignity becomes something you have to earn instead of something you're owed. The pain wasn't just in the slap. It was in how quickly it happened, in how natural it seemed to the woman who did it. Like it was something she believed she had the right to do. There was no hesitation, no second thought, only command, superiority, the confidence of someone used to control, convinced she'd never be questioned for using force against someone beneath her. That slap wasn't just about one woman and one moment. It was about power dynamics that show up in lobbies, in lunch counters, in classrooms. And for every viral video that draws outrage, there are thousands of unseen moments, unrecorded, unacknowledged, unspoken. What most people don't realize is that racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It whispers through delayed service, through extra receipts, through double checks and second glances, through assumptions, through silence. It eats at your confidence, your humanity. It makes you question whether speaking up is worth it, whether anyone will believe you, or if you'll just be labeled angry or difficult. It's the reason some shoppers keep their hands visible at all times. The reason some parents have to prepare their children before a mall visit, reminding them not to touch too much, not to talk too loud, not to run. It's a burden that shouldn't exist, but does. And it doesn't only live in dramatic moments like a slap. It lives in systems, in hiring practices, in classroom discipline, in policing, in healthcare. It lives in lowered expectations and narrowed opportunities. And yes, it lives in stores, places that claim to welcome all, but act as though only some are entitled to be there. That day, she left the store with more than just a red cheek. She left with a reminder of how far society still has to go. Because when someone who owns the store can't walk in without being profiled, the issue isn't perception, it's a sickness embedded in the culture. And until the people at the top are held accountable, until corporations stop treating racism as a PR problem instead of a human one, until dignity becomes non-negotiable for everyone, nothing will change. That's the deeper truth. This wasn't a one-off event. It was a mirror for a society that too often congratulates itself for progress while ignoring the reality of lived experience. And if people walked away from that story thinking, wow, that manager really messed up, they missed the point. The point isn't that the billionaire got slapped, it's that it took her being a billionaire for anyone to care. She could have walked away from it all. With her status, her wealth, her reach, silence would have been the safer choice. Let the internet rage for a week. Let the store's PR team spin the narrative. Let time wash away the sting of it all. But something inside her refused to let it end there. Because silence doesn't heal, and dignity shouldn't be conditional. Within weeks, she announced something new, not a business expansion, not a product launch, but a foundation. One built not for profit, but for purpose. Its mission was simple but radical: to grow leaders who lead with empathy. To train managers, executives, and decision-makers, not just in operations, but in understanding. In seeing humanity before assumptions. In hearing voices that are often silenced. This wasn't about revenge, it was about repair. The foundation offered intensive training in anti-racism, emotional intelligence, and cultural humility. Courses weren't optional. They weren't quick-fix seminars or check-the-box diversity days. They were immersive, ongoing, and deeply personal. Designed to make people uncomfortable, in the right ways. Designed to transform not just how people work, but how they see. But she didn't stop there. A large endowment followed. Quietly, she began funneling resources to organizations that had been fighting for years to dismantle racial bias in corporate systems. Groups that offered legal aid to those wrongfully terminated. Mentorship for professionals passed over despite qualifications. Mental health support for those worn down by the daily microaggressions no camera ever catches. The announcement caught fire, but the real impact came days later, when the inboxes opened. Thousands of emails, hundreds of thousands of comments, people from every background sharing stories they had once buried, stories of being ignored, followed, mocked, demeaned. Some had cried in the stockrooms, some had quit jobs to preserve their sanity. Some had carried years of silent anger and shame. Now they were speaking. This happened to me last year in a store. I thought I was overreacting. Your story gave me the courage to finally report my manager. I didn't know how much it still hurt until I saw you stand up. And there were others, people who used to be the manager in that story. People who had followed customers without reason, judged clients by looks, made jokes behind closed doors. They were writing too. I never realized how much harm I caused. I thought I was just doing my job. Now I see. That shift, the uncomfortable awakening, that was the goal all along. Because this wasn't about one slap. It wasn't about going viral. It was about building something that lasts, something that changes not just headlines, but habits. And most of all, it was about hope. Not the soft kind, not blind optimism, but the kind rooted in action, in showing the next generation of leaders that power isn't about control, it's about responsibility. And dignity isn't earned, it's inherent. The foundation became a lighthouse, a place where people could turn not for sympathy, but for solutions, where healing could begin, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong in a place they had every right to be. Certainly. Below is the final reflection and viewer call to action section, aligned with your storytelling tone, racism-centered narrative, and viewer engagement strategy. Word count is approximately 500 words, and the story ends powerfully as requested. It all began with a slap. One moment in a high-end store, one flash of rage, one decision to treat someone as less than, based entirely on how she looked, what she wore, what they assumed she wasn't. That sound echoed far beyond the walls of that store. Because disrespect doesn't always come in shouts. Sometimes it wears a name tag. Sometimes it stands behind a cash register. Sometimes it greets others with a smile, but narrows its eyes when you walk in. And what's most dangerous? It often believes it's right. That slap wasn't just about race. It was about power. About the way people decide who gets to belong, who gets courtesy, who deserves suspicion. But here's the real question. What if no one had been filming? What if she hadn't been wealthy? What if she had cried quietly in the parking lot with no one to speak for her? Would anyone care? Would it still matter? Would the manager still have been fired or praised for handling a situation? Because for every story that goes viral, there are thousands that don't. For every person seen, there are countless others erased, dismissed, dehumanized, disrespected. And that's why this story matters. Not just because of what happened, but because it was witnessed. Because it reminded the world that status doesn't shield you from bias, and silence doesn't solve it. But change, real, lasting change, it can start with a moment. A moment where someone refuses to be humiliated. A moment where truth walks out with its head held high. A moment where power chooses not to shout, but instead lets the silence speak. And so to you watching right now, what will you do the next time you witness something wrong? Will you speak? Will you record? Will you step in? Or will you scroll past? Because these moments don't just belong in viral clips or boardrooms. They happen in lobbies, at cash registers, in waiting rooms, on sidewalks. They happen everywhere. So let this story stay with you, not just as outrage, but as reminder that dignity isn't handed out by uniforms, that assumptions can be violent, that respect should never be conditional, and above all, power doesn't always speak, but sometimes when it's silent, it changes everything.